One of the reasons that we need to have this debate today is because recent events have shown that the government policy towards the Middle East has failed lamentably in recent years. It's been inconsistent because on the one hand we played realpolitik, appeasing certain regimes, and on the other we say that dictators are evil and that we must take action against them. It's been ineffective because we're friendly with a number of repressive states, particularly those in the Gulf, hoping for low oil prices. But as has been shown, this appeasement has not led to the stability we hoped for. More significantly, it is intolerable because our policy in the Middle East has had a very limited effect on stopping human rights abuse or promoting democracy, with exceptions which I will come on to later. It's often said that the measure of a man can be found by looking at his friends. And in the same way, the measure of a country can be found by looking at its allies. Honour killing is still legal in Iran, Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia and the Palestinian Authority. Homosexuality is still punishable by death in Iran and Saudi Arabia and by 3 years imprisonment in Syria. The events of recent years in particular have shown us that our Middle Eastern policy has been wrong. Now, I'm not ashamed to admit that I tend towards the neoconservative view of the world, and that is someone who believes that freedom, human rights, property rights, the rule of law, equality towards women, religious tolerance, rejection of terrorism, that all of these things are inalienable human rights and are something that should be spread all over the world. They say that a neoconservative is a liberal who's been mugged by reality. Now, whilst I'm not talking about my colleagues on the coalition benches, I prefer to use the term muscular enlightenment. Realpolitik seems to me that you appease or collaborate with unsavoury regimes in order to achieve certain foreign policy objectives. And it's as far removed from an ethical foreign policy as it's possible to be. Let us examine how realpolitik has failed. With the Saudis, the deal seems to be that we work with them financially, and in exchange they're allowed to promote their strain of Wahhabi Islam across the world, a branch of Islam that is considered extremist and heretical by many Orthodox Sunni and Shia groups. And on top of this, they're allowed to pour millions into our universities. What has the result been? Terrorism at home and abroad. Islamist extremism in our universities has increased, and we're no closer to a two-state solution in Israel and Palestine. And nowhere is this more true than in our relations with Libya. And my family knows something about this country, having lost their home, my grandfather having lost his home and business to Gaddafi. And my father was born there and even remembers shaking the hands of Gaddafi before he took power sometime in the 1950s. Now, with the release of al-Megrahi, the Lockerbie bomber, I believe that the last government hid behind the fig leaf of devolution to help facilitate the release of a mass murderer. In return for stability and for curtailing Gaddafi's alleged weapons of mass destruction, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown went far beyond what was necessary to build relations with Libya. Appeasement became collaboration. And we saw the last government boosting business links with Libya and facilitating university contracts with the Libyan authorities. As reported on the website of Liverpool John Moores University, dated 3rd of May 2007, the British ambassador to Libya, Sir Vincent Veen, even said, and I quote, "My vision for Libya is for a closer and more productive relationship with the UK than any other country." Now let me repeat that line, a closer and more productive relationship with the UK than with any other country. Now, if honourable members think of Libya, that statement is quite astonishing. It is a totalitarian state that murdered our own citizens in the Lockerbie massacre, and yet our own ambassador says that he wants deeper relations with Libya than any other country. Truly, the fish rots from the head down. But whilst I think it was wrong for universities in Britain to do deals with Libya, we can't blame them completely. Yes, the LSE and other universities signed millions of pounds of contracts, but the government were urging them on. And as has been revealed in written questions, The last Labour government met at the most senior levels to push these issues forward with the Gaddafi regime. We have to ask, why was this happening? What were we selling? What were the Libyans buying in terms of influence and acceptability? Now, John Kennedy said that foreign policy should be idealism without illusions. The realist school says, well, you can't just drop democracy from a B-52 bomber. And that was always a misrepresentation of what muscular enlightenment means. This was never just about military invasion. It was about winning hearts and minds and supporting democratic movements around the globe who share the ideals of freedom. And I reiterate the point that has been made this afternoon: democracy is not just about elections. If it's only about elections, then you have the situation of 2006 in Gaza, where Hamas sent its militia onto the streets, attacking the more moderate Fatah party, throwing them off the rooftops. But those who oppose freedom in the Middle East are exactly like those who opposed the end of slavery in the southern states of America in the 19th century. They always said, yes, we want to end slavery, but not yet. And the realpolitik of the Middle East says, yes, they should have democracy and human rights for women, but not yet. So what can we do to help freedom spread around the Middle East? Please.
Does he condemn the settlements in the occupied territories? Does he agree with the UN resolution voted for by Britain but vetoed by the United States?
No, I don't agree. Actually, I do believe that I do believe in a two-state solution, and I believe that obviously some of the West Bank will be given to as part of the Palestinian state. But I didn't agree with my government when they voted for that motion. Now, I accept that popular uprisings, such as the waves of protest across North Africa and Arab countries, might lead to Islamist fundamentalist rule. And we're not yet sure if this is Eastern Europe 1989 or Iran 1979, and arguably Iran is living through its own version of the terror that followed the French Revolution in 1879 with a despotic and brutal regime. But that's why we have to divert aid into building democratic institutions and nurturing them where they exist. And I want to turn to Iran as the elephant in the room. Through Hezbollah, Iran has huge influence in Lebanon. In Gaza, Iran supports Hamas. Iran also has close relations with the president of Syria. And we know that Iran supports activities against British troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. They may soon have more influence in Bahrain. And of course, they are about to have nuclear weapons. Iran is what Reagan once described the Soviet Union. It's the new evil empire. And using the example of Iran, we must not let the Middle East fall out of the frying pan of dictatorship into the fire of Islamism.
Would my honourable friend, just for 1 second?
Yeah.
Very much appreciate. Would my honourable friend agree with me that it's very important not to confuse the Iranian people with the Iranian government?
I think my honourable friend makes an incredibly important point, and I agreed with much of his speech earlier. The Iranian people have a totally opposite view to the regime that has sadly suppressed them for so long. So what is to be done? We need a radical reappraisal of our foreign policy. We need a strategy that supports democracy over dictatorships. The thrust has to be to support reformist movements in this region. And let me briefly talk about two of them. First, Kurdistan. Those who argue that democracy takes hundreds of years to evolve and say that we should not interfere, Kurdistan in northern Iraq proves the opposite. Established only in 2003, the regional government makes its own laws, controls its own army, and decides its own pace of economic development. It's relatively terrorist-free and a progressive Muslim country, despite facing continuous